Tanse, Damon Badger Heit here from Sask Culture, here to work with you folks on the Aboriginal Languages Initiative grant. I was to introduce myself first of all here and what I'm here to talk about. I've been working with Sask Culture for the last 11 years as a funding consultant for various funding programs, and recently come on board here with the Saskatchewan Indigenous Culture Centre in the support and development of this Aboriginal Languages Initiative for Saskatchewan. So thank you all for coming and to learn to this orientation. I just want to acknowledge I am broadcasting live from Treaty 4 territory here in Regina, Saskatchewan, from Sask Culture's office. For those of you that are listening in live, you are able to ask questions throughout the presentation here, but I won't be answering questions till the very end of the presentation, and it should be about an hour long. So we'll just get into it here. I'm going to be covering three sections of topics around the ALI grant here, and we'll be talking about the background, a little bit about the Aboriginal Languages Act that are currently underway, the emergence of third-party funding, and these different things that are coming up and happening that you should be aware of. We'll talk about the ALI guidelines, the things that you need to know when implementing your project, what you can spend money on, what you can't, all that type of stuff there. And then we'll be talking about, now that you've been approved, what is the approval process? What are the things you need to do to help get your projects moving and get money flowing and all the reporting requirements and so on. So I'm just gonna dive right in here and move forward. So the ALI in Saskatchewan here, this is the first year that the program has moved away from Canadian heritage to the Saskatchewan Indigenous Culture Centre. And what's kind of happening on the national level, if you're not aware right now, is the development of legislation around Aboriginal languages, what they're calling the Aboriginal Languages Act. So last year in June, around this time of year, the Government of Canada, AFN, the Inuit, Tapiriit, Kenatami, and the Métis Nation agreed to the co-development of this legislation. And so I can only speculate as to what that outcome will be. I'm not involved on that side of things. I'm here to implement a funding program with the SICC, but this is something that is currently underway and is expected to have some impact in terms of how this program runs and the types of dollars that are available moving forward. Later this summer, there are consultations that are taking place in Regina and Saskatoon specifically for First Nation languages. Though that in Regina on August 22nd, there is an opportunity to the Aboriginal Languages Act through these consultations, and in Saskatoon, that's on the 24th. AFN, from what I understand, is planning on having their own consultation prior to these dates, but I have not received that information yet as to when those are taking place. But those are dates that are coming up. If that is something that you feel you connect to and would like to participate in, please keep those in mind. And as I get confirmation on when things are happening, and I will share information with all of you. So SICC in last December became a third-party funding agent for Canadian heritage. So basically what that means is that people in the Prairie Province here of Saskatchewan are able now to apply directly to SICC for this grant program. And that also means that we have local people on the ground in the community that can work with you and other communities to projects, develop your ideas, and so on. And so currently there's 3 third-party organizations that are currently involved with Canadian heritage. The First Peoples Cultural Council of British Columbia have been a third-party funding agent for a number of years, given they support over 40 languages throughout BC. And so they've kind of led this in some ways, that they've established that relationship well ahead of time. Just this past year, 2018, the First Nations Confederacy of Cultural Education Centres in Ontario and the Saskatchewan Indigenous Culture Centre here in Saskatchewan came on board. So these are the two new third-party funding agents to Canadian Heritage. And so when we talk about transitionary years, that's what we mean. Like we're taking over the program for these provinces from Canadian Heritage to administer and to develop it from here. So for most of you, I assume, would be aware of who the Saskatchewan Indigenous Culture Centre is. They have been incorporated since 1972 and have been created to support Indigenous First Nations culture and education here in the province. And so they're the oldest running First Nations run education centre in Saskatchewan, especially. Their kind of their mandate in terms of language, would be based on these language groups that you see here. And if there are other languages that would want to apply to SICC, they certainly could, given depending on the context in which they're coming in and so on. So SICC, given their nonprofit organization, when they received the third-party funding, they approached SaskCulture for assistance to help them build that processes into their organization. And so I've been really happy to be working with both organizations. That's me right here. If you don't recognize me, I'm Damon. But I've been working, like I said, with SaskCulture for the past 11 years and have been involved with SICC in different capacities. So it was a really good opportunity for both organizations to come together to support this program and to help it move forward. So what you see here, this was back in December, where we've signed the partnership agreement to work on this together, to move this program forward together locally here in the province. SaskCulture, if you're not aware, we are a nonprofit, community-based, volunteer-driven organization. We do a lot of funding programs. We offer grants to nonprofits, to First Nation bands, to different communities around the province. We get our money from lotteries, and so we're not a government agency. We get confused with that. It's probably because of our name fairly regularly, but we are volunteer driven. Our board is all volunteer. All our adjudicators, all the people that help us with the funding programs are all community members. And so SICC saw that as a good fit for the work that they do, and we've been working together since. And so we do have our website here, and we do have a grants database where people can be applying for other funding. So just because you got ALI grant doesn't eliminate you from applying to additional supports from SaskCulture. So there are resources available here, and I'm able to speak with you to those as well. So pardon me, I just got to cough a bit. So just so we understand why we have 3 different organizations right now kind of in the field working with this grant program, I just want to kind of give a visual as to who's doing what right now. And so you folks, the people that have been applying, that are successful in getting some dollars, these would be you. SaskCulture has been contracted with SICC to work with you, to help your projects, to work on the granting processes and do all that type of administrative work. Meanwhile, SICC is currently working with the federal level, in the development of this Language Act and preparing that framework for how things will continue into the future. Currently, our partnership agreement is for 1.5 years. We're looking to have it expire in 2020, and then we'll basically reassess where we're at and how far along we've gotten in building this program or supporting this program. So these are just additional resources and information that you might want to research on your own time here, but if you are wanting to learn more about SICC, you can go to their website. The Canadian Heritage still has good information on their website. If you just Google any of these topics, you'll find some of that information. If you're curious about third-party delivery organizations, there's information about that on their website as well. Then there's the discussion guides and the reference material and input opportunities for this Language Act. And so these are links, but you can't click on them here, obviously. But I can send these out if these are something you want to see. But these are all available on Canadian Heritage's website, and you can research it and learn about what's going on from there. So that's all I had to say about just to give you some background as to what's going on with this grant, what's going on kind of on a federal level, and what's going on locally here with this partnership and the way things are working. So the second part is the guidelines. And if you're like me, I went through all the Canadian Heritage materials, and it was very thick and very dense. And I could see it as being a sort of a challenge to understand all the ins and outs of what this program is supposed to be about. And so I spent a lot of time just trying to extract the main points, so that everyone can be working off the same materials and the same information. So I really tried to simplify what they're getting at. And so currently, and again, like when I say currently, like this is the criteria of Canadian Heritage. Some of this might change now that SICC is a third-party funder moving forward. I can only speculate that there might be some adjustments to different priority levels and outcomes, but this is currently what exists and currently what we're sort of married to, for the duration of this year at least. But in the future years, some of this might be different. So this is basically the objective, which is just the broad stroke definition of what this grant is to do. And so you've all probably had a chance to read that by now. There are, under the ALI funding program, there's three pillars or three streams of priorities, right? And so most of the applicants come in doing community-based language projects, right? These are like the culture camps or the language camps or community language lessons, after school programs, evening classes, basically activity that involves participation of students, or language learners. The master and apprentice stream is more intimate in the sense where it's more of a one-on-one type of activity where you're intensifying the language acquisition of an individual to become more advanced in their areas of work. The third stream is the resource development, and many of you have come in to develop dictionaries or MP3s, CDs, technology, resource curriculum, things like that. So these are basically the three pillars that sort of drive the projects that come in through this grant. And then these are the sub kind of priorities that would sort of fit underneath these main pillars. So just as you're aware, like this is a PowerPoint I'm going off of right now, so I will share this as the video down the future. If I'm going too fast, let me know, but this will be available to everyone later on as it's currently being recorded. So the ineligible activities that would not be considered for this program are basically the development of regular accredited school curriculum. And what they mean by this is basically there's a distinction between education funding and ALI funding, and they don't want to overlap. And so ALI funding will not replace classroom time. It will not replace things that are going in towards your elementary K-12 or high school university level degree type accreditation. So it's not monies that can be used for that. And so it's basically community based outside of the classroom type of an approach. Powwows, gatherings, festivals, conferences, career fairs, again, they're not specific to activity that's not specific to language acquisition will not be considered. Capital construction and renovation are obviously expenses that most project grants won't look at. This particular one here, the General Indigenous Language Promotional Activity or Planning Committee, what I kind of interpret this as is activity that, again, that isn't directly doing the programming. So it wouldn't consider activities wouldn't consider activities that are sort of preparing to do the language activity, if that makes sense. So if you're to get a group of people together to talk about what type of project you might do in the future, that wouldn't be good enough or enough work to access this funding. You'd have to go a step further and say, we already know what we're going to do, and this is how we're going to do it. So that's how it works. So I just saw a question from Cheryl show up here, and yes, that's where you put your question. So again, if you're wondering where to put questions, there is a question tab on probably on the right hand side of your webinar screen, and that's where you can enter questions. So we don't do employment training, and we don't any activity outside the eligible project dates is ineligible, and we'll talk about what eligible project dates are a little later on. So this is, you've already gotten in the door, in terms of your eligibility, but again, I've really tried to simplify this in a format so you can tell all your friends who can apply, for the next round. Basically, priority is given to organizations that are Indigenous controlled, and so 51% of a board or governance structure has to be Indigenous for organizations such as nonprofits, unincorporated nonprofits, ad hoc committees, government or equivalent organization, delegated authority, or academic institution. So the list is fairly broad who can apply. The ad hoc is sort of a recent addition to this list, and that basically means you're a group of individuals who want to do a project. There's a whole different level of liability involved with this, so it is a bit more I guess you'd call risk, for the financial sense, where it's not incorporated or protected by the board structure and those types of things. So folks that have come in through this have taken personal liability, have to be fairly aware, that they're taking risk on when they do that. For groups that are non-Indigenous controlled organization, 50% or less of their board governance are Indigenous, then they can't apply on their own. They need to have one of these groups above here kind of endorsing or supporting their project in some way, in a meaningful way, not just a ticket to ride, but that they're involved somehow in informing this process. The only example we'd have of this occurring this round would be with the Man Art Gallery partnering with Atakakoop and IPAC, the Indigenous Peoples Artists Collective. And so that's the only example we have to point to this year in that situation. And again, same types of organizations can apply, but they have to have a meaningful partnership in place. Or people who can't apply, again, are just an individual person. Like Damon Badger Heit can't submit an application to go do a project. I'd have to either become an ad hoc organization with a number of other individuals, or attach myself to an eligible organization to move a project forward. Organizations that are not in good standing with ISC, we check that status when an application comes in to make sure that their incorporation is standing. If they've been struck, we can't move forward with that application. Again, we've talked about this already with the board structure. Non-Indigenous controlled organizations can't move forward without that strong evidence of Indigenous partnership. For-profit organizations aren't eligible. Applicants who previously have been funded by Canadian Heritage but are not in compliance with the contribution agreement won't be considered. So the contribution agreement is something that we're currently in development with all of you. And that outlines all the responsibilities that are involved with receiving these dollars. If you're unable to see those through, it can affect future applications. Organizations that are outside of Canada, we can't fund, and non-democratically held and managed organizations, I don't know what that might mean, probably for profit or something like that, but most nonprofits, if not all, have to be controlled by a board of governors. And again, your bands and education centers as well have some level of democratic processes. The timelines for projects when people come in, like all of these timelines are constricted by the fiscal year of the federal government, and so we can't start anything sooner than July 1st. I know most of you applied in December, and half a year later we're getting the information, and that's something I really hope we can improve on for future years, because I know it's cumbersome and difficult to respond on short notice to deliver on projects that you said you'd start last week. So we are aware of that, and we're hoping that in future years we can improve it. But currently, July 1st to the end of March 31st is what the project timelines are. That leaves a window of time that projects do not happen, right? Which is the April, May, June months. So if they're a quarter of the year, there's no alley projects happening just because of this fiscal year situation. So we're hoping moving forward we're able to somehow to work around that in some way, but that's what we're married to for the time being. There are situations now where you can apply for multi-year funding up to 2 years, and so there is one group that did successfully acquire that, and so basically they are able now to do their project from July 1st to March 31st, 2020. All right, and so they're going to be kind of the guinea pig for how this works, because this hasn't been done before either. So we'll be figuring we'll be able to do a trial run with this client or this organization to see how that works for informing future years of how we're going to approach that. So when you apply, the suggested minimum request amount is 25 grand, and so it's a suggested amount is what it says. My interpretation is anything less than that, will be cumbersome for the amount of reporting that is involved, in overseeing these projects. So they're saying, apply for at least 25 grand if you're coming into alley, have some ambitious plans in place, have some significant work to work on for the year. So they're looking for larger size projects. Again, the maximum being 200,000 per year. So there is a broad range of movement in between those two numbers. SaskCulture funds quite a bit less than 25 grand. So if you're looking for smaller projects, that are not 25,000 or higher, you can be applying to SaskCulture for some of your activity. There, we do support language camps, we do support culture camps, things like that. So if that's of interest, you can talk to us about that too. So this took a little work to pull together because it was spread out over about 6 pages. And again, my effort here is to really simplify things so we get a very clear picture of what we're looking at. Canadian Heritage has these 2 percentage amounts for where they want dollars being spent on projects. What they prioritize are your wages, your material supplies, facility costs, and advertising and promotion. So your project-related expenses that are doing the output and the work, right? And so 80% at least has to be spent on this, on these areas. So these would be your helpers, your language teachers, your camp support people, your technology developers, whoever you're employing to make this work. Any material costs related and so on. Where they have sort of limits or ceilings on what you can spend is on these 4 categories. So your administration, we would encourage you to use this. This is to hire your grant reporting people, your finance people, because we really want to make sure that everybody's able to really report strongly on these applications. Our sense is, we're going to be, because it is a first year, we are a third-party funded, that we really need to make sure that everything is accounted for, once we've finished our year end. And if you're successful, we're all successful. And that's really something to pay attention to, is to make sure that you have your finances in check and you have a strong administration to deliver on your project. So if you want to use up to 15% budget on that, you can, and that's available to you. Included in that is insurance, and we'll talk about the insurance later. I know a number of you had questions about the liability insurance, and we'll get to that. The food, they say, like, you know, if you're spending, for example, if you're spending 15% on administration, you only have 5% left to share between these three. So there's different, you have to play with that amount of money. So for example, if you had a $100,000 grant, you'd have $20,000 to split amongst these four categories. So the food, again, not central to teaching the language, although it could be a component of it. We can talk about ways to do that, but if you can get for the camps and venues like that where you have very high food expenses, you know, that might be an opportunity to secure other funding from the band or from other areas if possible. But there are ceilings on what can be spent. The transportation issue, you know, we have a situation where we can only fund travel within Canada. I know, especially for a lot of the Nakota groups, and we have a couple this round that bring people up from the States, you know, to work on projects. Technically, we can only pay for them once they've crossed the border in terms of their travel expenses. So when you're working on your budgets, you know, maybe just thinking about how to compensate their wage, you know, to offset some of that, if they're really going out of pocket to get to where they are. So just be careful around that, because we will have to keep all the receipts and all that type of stuff with all the project expenses that move forward. The purchase, lease, rental of equipment, that type of a thing. If you're doing that's great, but if you're spending more than $2,000 on it, then you have to keep an inventory of the things that you have. And so that inventory, I don't have a template for an inventory, but that would be something that you would have to come up with, you know, if that is something that's happening. So if you're producing books or CDs and for whatever reason they're over $2,000, you have to inventory what your materials are for that. Good. Oh, a big long list of what they don't want to spend money on. Okay, so I'll try to get through this very quickly here. So again, it's a project grant. We can't pay core funding for an organization, staffing, or the ongoing governance or running of an organization. So these are project expenses that need to be specifically for the project. We can't pay for anything prior to your start date, you know, so we're retroactive funding, that type of a thing. So I know some of you said you'd start in July 1st, but haven't received money. We would still pay for anything you've spent from here on out. Anything before July we could not pay for, but we could pay for retroactively up until July 1st for those of you that said that you're starting then, even though you haven't been paid. Employment, we've talked about that. We talked about festivals, gatherings already. Capital, we talked about that. We talked about the travel. Stipends, allowances, and honoraria for attendance in a course or activity. That means you're not paying participants to participate. You know, language learners who come to a camp or come to a class are not being paid to be there, right? And so that's not something that they want to pay for. Conferences are one thing. This large meetings bit here, like that's pretty loose. You know, when you're bringing a camp together, you could be having a large meeting there. So I'm not too sure how to interpret that. I think it's basically, again, just the activities have to be language acquisition and not just talking about language acquisition, if that makes sense. Curriculum, we talked about curriculum or the formal education system already. We don't pay your board members or your principal officer, which I would interpret to be like your CEO or something to that effect, which would tie back into that core funding idea. Startup operation costs for institutes, training centers, commercial enterprise, not something we pay for. Contingency or miscellaneous fees, we don't support I guess you call slush funds or funds that have no definition as to what they're intended for. So some of you did have miscellaneous or contingency in your budgets. You'll have to take those out as you work on your cash flow. Deficit recovery, cash prizes, gifts or purchases of alcohol, activity that exclusively promotes definable religious or political viewpoints, and the contribution of volunteer hours are not eligible project expenses, right? So volunteer hours would fit under in-kind, but it's again not something that would have any amount of cash attached to it. So that whole last section is going to be sort of, I guess, part of better informing people at the front end when they're doing applications of what the rules are and what the criteria is. And so we will have that much better presented for future applications at the next deadline in December. And again, I see like there are questions being asked here. I do see your questions for those of you that are asking them. Again, I'll come to them and respond to them at the end of this presentation because some of them might be answered by the time we get there. But otherwise, we'll spend some time to answer those when we're done here. So you've been approved, and we're going to talk now about what that means and then the amount of things that will be required moving forward here. So this is basically just a linear type of image to sort of show what this approval process means. So we're kind of in this stage. We had your applications come in, we adjudicated them, and now we're in this position of approving we have approved them, and they are requiring these documents here now. So the cash flow, the key dates and activities, and your liability insurance are three different attachments that would feed into your contribution agreement. So the contribution agreement we'll talk about a bit more in depth later, but it's basically the contract between you and the funder, that lays out all of these rules in a lot more detail than what I'm presenting here. And that would trigger your first payment. So I know everyone's thirsty to get that first payment, and we're thirsty to get it out, but we need these things to make that happen. And so I will be working with you to try, hopefully get those done by July 15th. That's my goal, is that everybody can get that done by then, hopefully. So your work plan or your key dates and activity, this is kind of the template you all would have received. And so basically this is a way, because this is someone else's grant program that we came in midstream. When you applied, it was sitting with Canadian Heritage, and then it moved to SICC, and then it came to SaskCulture. So SaskCulture has a granting system in place. We have software, a database, all this nice technology that really helps organize all of this for us. But coming into this, we're for this year and this year only, we're going to be working off spreadsheets, just because it's not something that we were able to integrate into our technology at this point. So this work plan, some of you who have received ALI funding in the past, this is a new document that we created to help us monitor and track all the different activities that are taking place. And so it's kind of set up in with sort of three different time periods of July to September, October to December, January to March. And so that's the lifespan of most projects. Some projects might be done by August or September, some might be done by December here, but these yellow poles would symbolize or represent when interim reports are due and when final reports are due. And so what we want to see here, is you've already done some of this work already, and we're just asking you to lay it out. And so when you did your applications, you would have filled out this Part C resource table. And this resource table would list all the different things, the deliverables that you're going to be producing with your work. And so, for example, you might have culture camp, or a language camp that's taking place. You might be doing a master and apprentice program here, or you might be doing a dictionary or some research of some sort. So for the culture camp, you're saying we're going to do it in August. You just tell us right here, culture camp's done in August, and that's all that's happening for that. Or maybe you have a fall one too, or maybe a winter one too, but you'd identify when and where that's taking place. So we know what we're looking for when we're doing our interim reports and so on. If you're doing master apprentice, maybe it's running from September to March, when you have a period of time where that's taking place. You just fill in the box and say, we're doing 5 sessions a month or something like that, right? And just give us some information as to what we're holding you accountable to for your reporting. And this will help feed into our ability to monitor and inform Canadian Heritage as to what's going on and so on. So this is just a way to to monitor and track everything that's happening. But it also feeds into the cash flow budgets because it's broken out into those time periods as well. And so if when you're looking at your cash flow, you'll see that they're broken up into these time periods too. And so if all the activity that you're doing here would inform that section of your cash flow as well. So the cash flow, like I said, would have these sections, right? So this would be the July to September. This would be October to December, January to March. This cash flow, we're going to do its own separate webinar on hopefully next week, and just to show people how it works and how to use it, and all the different programming or the different formulas that are involved with it. And so I'm hoping both myself and Gary Anaquad from SICC will take a walk through all the functions of this cash flow document so that people can use it with more confidence, because it is a bit of intimidating to look at if you haven't seen something like this before or worked on something like this before. But basically, we're not going to be looking at this April to June section, so you can just ignore that part. But all the different activities that are taking place, we'd want them broken down for your revenues and your expenses and your in-kind. And again, these are things that we monitor. And so for now, it'll be your forecasted. The screen's a bit small, so you can't probably see it, but there's little buttons here that say forecast, and there's a little button there that says actual. And so it is both your forecasted budget, but it is also your actual budgets once you actually start reporting on your expenses. But again, we'll get into that more in detail next week, and we'll send you out a link to when that webinar will be taking place, because we're just going to dedicate time to walk through all this and how it works. So the liability insurance was something that is involved in the contribution agreement, and so it is a requirement that Canadian Heritage has put in there. I contacted them because some of you have received ALI funding before, and you said you've gone through different ways of being covered and didn't have to actually purchase liability insurance in the past. So there are different scenarios that can be covered. Basically, this is intended to cover you, cover your participants and so on, mostly in the sense of camps. Right, the Canadian Heritage isn't really all that concerned with liability for master apprentice programs or someone doing research. It's really about protecting people who are attending large gatherings, where there's fires or potential for injury, that type of a thing. And so it's just something they want everyone to have. To make sure everybody's okay. And so some of you will have that already. If you're already an established organization that does activities, has events, you might have this already. All we need is a photocopy and just send it in and it attached to your file. If you're an organization that doesn't have insurance, but you're working with a partner that does, you can use theirs if they're willing to do that. And so, for example, there might be a group of you that are working with a school, and the school is bringing students to attend your language camp. In that scenario, the school could be using their liability insurance. We just need some type of evidence or some type of assurance that that's the situation, so that we can put that in your file. Could just be a letter from the school saying we're aware of this event, we're participating in it, and we're going to cover the insurance needs for it. So that's just all we need to address that. But if you are a nonprofit and this is something you're going to be doing more and more of, particularly if there are resources available to you, then you probably just want to consider just getting that yourselves, and just having something to cover you, and protect yourself and your board and protect your participants. And so those are kind of the different scenarios that we can address what this issue is with the liability insurance. And again, it is a requirement, but there's different ways you can go about having that covered. So that contribution agreement is a longer document. It's about 16 pages long. maybe 20. I don't know yet. It's currently our revised document is sitting with Canadian Heritage right now. They're just going through it to make sure they're happy with it. In the past, this would have been a contract between a community and the Queen of England. Now we're trying to move that to be a contract between you and SICC. So we're getting rid of a lot of the language in there that might feel a little colonial and challenging when trying to do language programs. And again, to make it legitimately between you and the third-party funder, who's now SICC. So we took out quite a bit of the lawyerese discussions in there, or the statements that we found a bit problematic in this work. And so it's currently being reviewed by Canadian Heritage, but we're hoping to get that back soon so we can share that with you and get it signed off on so we can get you paid. Your cash flow, your work plans, that's all attachments that go with this contribution agreement. So we need you to get those done so we can get this done, and then we can move things forward fairly quickly. So the reporting schedule, the monitoring reporting documents that you're going to be looking for and keeping track of, we've talked about these cash flow and key dates and activities documents, your work plan stuff. These I'd like to have done by July 15th at the latest. The situation is we need everybody's cash flow and key dates so we can complete our cash flow and key dates. We have our own cash flow document to monitor all these projects with. And in order to get money moving, we need to be able to submit that to Canadian Heritage. And in order to submit it to Canadian Heritage, we need all of your cash flow documents complete. So we're hoping everyone can be a team player in getting those done, because if someone's not complete or holding it back, then that means we're all kind of stuck waiting. So please be on top of those so that we can move quickly, and because I know some people are expecting and hoping to start their projects here first thing in August, now that we're already delayed. What you'll all receive as well as this participation evaluation form. So this is basically a data form that Canadian Heritage wants filled out by both you and participants. So it's a way to track participation numbers, and it's also intended to track language development. So did someone learn how many words, or did they go from completely a 10-word person to a 200-word person, right? So these are ways to try to monitor the impact that you've had with your projects, as well as the amount of people that have been involved with them. And so those will be forms that will be sent out with your contribution agreement that you'll be expected to complete to feed into our data for overall for the program. There are 2 different interim reporting periods for those that are seeing projects go through those timelines. The first one will be in September 28th, and the second one will be January 5th. Their final report would be due June 15th. So that's given some time. So again, some of you are some of you will be done your projects before September, so you could already be done your final report by the end of October or whenever, right? So these will differ for different people depending on what your project timelines are. But this is going to be sort of the standard spine, or is the standard timeline for the year. And you can expect that there'll be requests for audited financial statements for all these projects. I can probably guarantee that's going to be the case. So when you're doing your administration, work that in. Make sure that you have your finances accounted for, because it is likely they're going to want these statements from most of you. Given my past experience with Canadian Heritage, they do request that that's part of the final report. So make sure that you have plans in place to have that done going through your projects. So again, the funding payment periods, these are again tied to your interim reports and so on. So we have the first payment period. It was supposed to be out last couple of weeks ago, but again, we have been delayed with work between Canadian Heritage and so on. So it's something that we're working on, but again, we need these documents complete in order to trigger that first payment. So the cash flow key dates, we have to get that done with everybody to make this move. The second pay period is again based off your cash flow documents. And would be triggered upon the receipt of your interim report. And so these interim reports, just so you're aware, aren't that cumbersome. Like there's a written piece to it, there's a data piece to it, you're tracking information and so on, but they're not asking for a full financial report on any of these interim reports until you get to the final report area. So the final report will have the full audited financial statement, the full financial picture, but these are mostly just data and some written explanation as to where you are in your projects and any updates or changes to your budgets that you might be having. The first interim report is at the end of September. The second interim report and third payment is again beginning of January. This also includes a budget forecast leading up to March 31st. And so they'll ask you, what have you done up to this point? And now that we're reaching the end of the project, if you're still doing your project at this point, they'll want a budget forecast because their fiscal year ends here. And they'll want to know if what to hold back for final payment. So there is a 5% holdback pending that final report. And so that'll be calculated based off your cash flow document again. Anyway, so that's what I had to talk about here in a nutshell. Again, this is my contact information. I'm your helper, so if you need questions or if there's things that you need help with and anything that you're doing with your projects, please reach out to me. I'm not I guess I'm not the government. I'm a community member here, and so this is what I've been doing for the past 11 years of my professional career. Has been working in community funding programs for cultural activity, and so I do have some expertise in this area, and I am here to support you. So I do have a number of questions that have populated here, and I'll start to work through them. So I do have one. The question about from Cheryl, on my application that was approved, there was a line that had consultant and professional fees, but had a different expense item beside it. Are consultant and professional fees eligible expenses? And I'd say yes. They're both wages, for project expertise to help your activity happen. I guess it depends on the context too in some situations. So I'd have to know a little bit more about that, but it's mostly when they're saying things that are ineligible for project expenses, they're mostly talking about existing staff, so if for example SaskCulture applied to Ali and they want to use me as the main driver, you couldn't really, I'm already doing my job, right? And the money should be going to help the projects happen. With the hired expertise that you have in place. So I would say that those are both eligible. Again, the challenge with Ali is that there are multiple different budget sheets. There's the application that you submitted will be a budget on that. There's going to be the cash flow budget that you have on that, and then there's another budget in the contribution agreement that just shows eligible expenses, like what you're approved for. So it is convoluted and it is difficult. We were really hoping to simplify this for clients in the future years here, but we're currently stuck with Canadian Heritage's criteria. So again, I'm here to help and work through these with you. But my short answer to your question is yes, that both of those would be eligible. When we have one from Sandy Panay here up in Cowessus, they're saying that they are the guinea pig, for the 2-year funding. So they wanted to know if that they've been approved for 2 years, could they apply again in 2019 to support 2020 activity, or sorry, 2018? Can we, or so they can can they apply again at the next deadline, even though they have projects that are happening concurrently? Yes, you can. So there's no limit on how many applications you can submit. So we've had one situation where we had a multiple. So we had a community that had 2 different proposals that they submitted. They technically could have just did one, with those 2 different components in them, but they decided to just submit 2 different proposals for 2 different ideas. They were approved for both, so there's no I don't think any issue around that. So you can submit multiple applications. If you have received multi-year funding, you can still apply for another additional initiative, thereafter. So that's not a barrier. You can continue with any plans that you might have in place with that. I'm just reading this one here again. So I looked at our 2-year plan again. This is still from Sandy. We will conclude in March of 2020, but we have a 3 to 4 year continuing plan. So I guess that feeds into what you're talking about before. So yes, go ahead and apply. So what we're really excited for is that that we've been approved to continue this program leading up to the next deadline. And so what we didn't have the opportunity for this past year is that we'd had no opportunity to do any consultation with any of you prior to leading up to the last application deadline. And so that's something that we're hoping to really put some energy into in the fall, is that we're going to do some outreach. We're going to do some more webinars like this for how to apply. We're going to be a little more present to work with applicants leading up to the application deadline, and not just have that window of time after you've applied to work with you. And so that's how we're planning on proceeding here. So I have another question from Cheryl here. So does it mean I can apply for multi-year funding if I have been approved for 1 year already? Yes, you can. So your next, again, maybe I should clarify that a bit. So it would have to. So if you've been approved, you're currently doing your project, you're ending this March coming up, and you apply for multi-year funding, that funding would start for July 2019, 2021, right? March and 21. So we probably should do a little bit of work to lay that all out. Again, that's a new criteria that was just added, so we haven't really had an opportunity to really massage how it's going to work, and so we still have a little bit of efforts to do to make that cleaned up. But again, we're rebuilding this project. What you're going to look forward to in the fall, the next deadline, is that we are planning on building this program into SaskCulture's technology. And so we do have online granting software that we do use that helps you monitor what's going on, helps us get that information back and forth quite a bit easier, and producing reports and all that type of stuff, but really hopefully simplifying all the different papers that are flying around, because I have a giant folder here of all the ALI documents that I've spent the last few months really trying to understand. And it's a challenge, and so we're really hoping to clean this up and make it a lot more user friendly. And so the multi-year criteria, the single-year criteria, all that type of stuff, we do really hope to have that laid out in very clear and concise terms as to what that all means, and what that all is all involved with that. But it is new, so we're just coming into it new as well. So I don't see any more questions here. So I think that concludes what I had to share here today. Again, if something occurs to you and you just want to send me an email or call me, please do. I'm going to be here most of the summer. I don't think I'm going to get much holidays, because we just got the green light to move on this program. So I will be chasing you all down for your cash flow documents and all that type of stuff over the summer, and helping people get prepared for their projects and their work. And I like my job title here at SaskCulture is I am an outreach consultant. Right, and so I do travel to communities, I do visitations and all that type of stuff. So if you're having an event and you'd like me to come, please let me know, and I'd be happy to try to work that into my plans. And I know SICC is in the same situation, where they want to send their staff to be supportive and to help you with your work as well. And so we're again just learning our roles in this new situation, and we look forward to working with you. And so again, Damon Badger Heit, I'm your your liaison ally. I like to call myself an ally. So Aboriginal Languages Initiative ally in supporting all the work that you do. I'm really happy to be involved with this program and to support you all and to support language in the province. So, Pitma, thank you very much, and we will be in touch. So I am signing off here. Take care all. Thank you for listening.